Hey everyone, welcome back to Everything's Messy podcast. I am your messy host, Sarah. Joining me today, I have Jason Silver. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Incredible story. You have a book coming out.
So I'm told.
Are you excited about that?
Very excited. I think I never expected to be writing a book. It still feels a little bit surreal when people are like, "Oh, look, we're like talking to the author of Your Grass is Greener," which is the name of my book. I'm like looking behind me for like, where's the author?
Where's the author?
So very, very excited. It's a lot of work and time and energy to get the book out, and I'm really fired up to like get it into people's hands and shift from I'm writing a book to hey, my book's in the
Hey, it's
world and
out.
let's see what's happening. So
That's so exciting. I ask all the authors that I have on the show, what did you think about the actual writing before we get into your story? What did you think
yeah.
about the actual writing process of writing the
Uh
book?
yeah, overall fantastic. Like learned a ton. It is the kind of fun that's like hard fun, that in the moment I wouldn't say it's the same kind of fun as sitting on a beach, running around with the kids, playing in the water.
Sure, sure.
But I really enjoy the challenge. For me, it was a big challenge to like take some concepts that are business in nature. I talk a lot about work and how to change your approach to work and how that can help you overall in your life. But how do you take a concept like that and distill it down to a really clean problem statement in every chapter so people can have a takeaway? And then on top of that, I know folks don't read tons of books. And then for myself, if I'm reading a book and it's not an enjoyable read, I put it down. And so this puzzle of how do I give you something tactical? How do I make it incredibly, simple? Not because I don't think people are smart, but because when it gets overcomplicated, it's just hard to action. And then how do you make it enjoyable to read? And the feeling I had when, you struggle through it for months to get a chapter right, and then it kind of clicks in and the pieces fit together, is really super rewarding. So
That's neat.
overall, I enjoyed it, but it
I love
is
to hear that because it's
it
sort
is
of
hard.
mixed. I've had some authors that are like, I don't recommend it. I hated the process, and then others are like you, where they absolutely loved it. Did you ever see yourself as an author? Is that
No,
anything? No.
yeah, I still don't. The genesis of the book is I had learned some stuff for myself in my own life that was a little bit counterintuitive to what I had kind of been taught and learned from my experience, in the various things I had done. And as I started working with other folks and helping them with some of the tactics I was learning and seeing the benefits that they were getting, I got a lot of feedback from them around like, hey, where are you getting this stuff from? We read a lot. I've not read what you're talking about. You got to write this stuff down. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not an author. That's not me. It's not a thing that I would really think about doing. And I actually started by building out a course and I
Oh,
failed.
okay. Oh,
Because I never started. So I built the whole course, right? And it was based on stuff I had, kind of taught in the past. And I set up the website and the whole backend for the course is ready to go. And all I had to do was record the presentations that I was perfectly ready to record. I had the slides, I just had to hit record in front of my laptop and I couldn't do it. I pushed it off and pushed it off and pushed it off because and in reflection, it's not the way I wanted to interact with folks. Me talking into a camera with nobody on the other side, not knowing who's reading it, not knowing where it's going, not getting the personality into it the way I wanted to. And I decided like this thing's not a course. I've been getting so much pressure to write it down. Let's just write a bit and see what happens. Do I like it and do people value it? And I think I wrote the preface in the first chapter. Mm. I sent it around to people. I shocked myself that I enjoyed the process of writing it. And I sent it to folks, and the feedback was great. And I don't mean you're the greatest author ever.
sure,
I
sure.
mean, it was highly constructive. This, and this is really interesting. And I've not heard that before. This stuff over here is crap. You got to cut that or reword that or like, and then it just turned into a bit of a game where I didn't tell anybody I was writing a book. I didn't think about
I
it as
love
writing a
that.
book.
I
I
love
just kind
that.
of, it snowballed on me. And then before I knew it, it was a lot of work. It was a kind of a passion project. But at some point, I realized you got to choose here. Like you're either committing to this thing being a book or what are we doing? You're not
Yeah.
writing in your diary about this stuff.
Right, 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 right. And I think there's something to be said really of holding your cards close to your chest. I really think there's power in that move and not letting people know exactly what your plan is and what you're doing, and then watching it develop like you
Yeah.
did, which is, I think, super exciting. And, you know, there's two schools of thought, sharing it with everybody. They can go along with you on the journey, but I think sometimes that journey has to be independent and you have to see kind of what you're made of in order to do this. And so I think that that can be really exciting.
Yeah, I kind of like skated down the middle, like people were with me in that they were critiquing my work without knowing the like scope of the work,
Yeah,
and that was really helpful. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of the book, kind of looking back, is I think it is the first purely creative endeavor I've done in my career. I'm an engineer by training, then I went into business, and everything I'm always thinking about is what's the business plan? What are the business
sure,
objectives? Who are the
sure.
people involved? What's the team? How do we assemble this? Raise the money, do the this, do the that. This was purely creative. And it was, I want this thing to exist. I wasn't thinking a lot about how am I going to sell it? Is it going to make
Right,
money?
the
What's the
logistics
marketing
part of
plan?
it. Yeah, yeah.
So
Did
I
that
think
surprise you? Were you surprised that you could tap into that creative stream?
I fought it really hard.
Did you?
It's like every time my mind went to, uh, what's the go-to-market plan, so to speak, going to be for this thing? I was like, good question. Write it down in your notebook. Don't think about it. But it was helpful through the lens of who's the reader? Why would they care about this? What problem am I trying to solve? These are like the core aspects of any great business plan, in my
Sure.
opinion. So as the book got closer and closer to being done, I had the essence without the plan around it. I knew what I wanted to say and who I wanted to say it to and why I thought the book was important and how it's different from the 10,000 other books, in the general space that my book is in. But I had not put the time into what's the publishing industry like? How does it feel to get an agent? How do you go and get an agent? What does that look like? How do you publish a book? How much money do you make when you publish a
Yeah,
book?
yeah. Or how much money you have to put out up front.
That's right. And so I was blissfully ignorant until the moment I was
I
no
love
longer blissful in my ignorance. But yeah,
that.
it's all part of the process. But I'm proud that I'm proud of the end product because I hope it's going to stand on its own, and
Yeah,
I hope that people will read it and they'll get that feeling that like I enjoyed when I wrote this thing. I made it in a way that I want you to enjoy it. I hope that kind of comes through. So when you read it, you enjoy it and you're like,
yeah,
okay, great. And if people like it, they'll tell other people about it. And if they don't,
exactly.
then, I'll learn some great lessons and we'll see from
Right,
there.
right, right. No, I love that. And I'm sure people are like, okay, but what's the messy story? Okay, I promise we're going to get that, but I have one more question because
Sure.
I'm a nerd by trade and I love to hear the process of book writing and have contemplated it myself. So I like to kind of gather the information as I go. And I'm sure people are like, okay, stop. I want to hear the story. But before we go there, really quick, and of course name dropping is a great trade to have for book writing, but you actually worked with the editor who did Atomic Habits, which we talk about on this show all the time, one of my favorite books. What was that experience like?
Yeah, amazing. It showed me the scope of my I don't know if ignorance is the right word, but something like that. Like he really showed me how much I had to learn about writing. It was an awesome experience. That was the first moment when I felt like, hey, actually, I might be writing a book. And that was the stage where I had kind of written like 80% of the core content of the book, I would say, which I learned is like 40% of a finished book. But I had written a lot of the core content and I'm a big reader, so I'd read a ton of books and I was thinking about, how am I actually going to turn this thing into a book? And so I picked up 10 books I really liked. I looked in the back. Turns out authors almost always list their editors. And I reached out to those 10 editors. And a couple of them got back to me, and one of them was one of the folks involved in Atomic Habits. And his feedback was great. He was just like, I forget exactly what he said, but it was something like, you've got the bones and some of the connective tissue of a potentially really great book here.
Wow, that's
Right.
exciting.
And I was like, oh, that's fun. And that was the first time that somebody who I'm not I'm not in the publishing industry. I'm not an
Sure,
author by
sure.
training. This was the first time that somebody in that space critiqued my work and said, hey, I'm interested enough in this that like I'd like to jump on. And from then on, I writing a book changed the way I communicate. And it's largely thanks to Blake.
That's it.
It was
That's
really, really
really cool.
incredible.
I
Really, really
love that.
incredible.
I love that. I really like, I was sort of picturing in my head when we talk about editors and things like that, you have everything written on a piece of paper and you're so excited of the product that you think you've produced, and then you hand it to the editor and it's like slashed red through the
Oh
whole
no, it
thing.
is that. It is that, So after I worked with Blake, and we can nerd out on the publishing process all you want, but there are many steps of editing. But after I had already gone through what's called like a developmental edit, which was like bringing the book to the point where it was like polished and ready to go, then it goes through editing, like copy editing, making sure you don't have errors, making sure it's clean, precise, whatever. There were, I forget the exact number, but it was well over 2,000 red lines on the book after it had already been edited, and
Oh
I had
no.
edited, and multiple people had read the book and provided their comments. So many, many rounds, and I don't know, countless numbers of hours of editing. And at that point, I thought, oh, we're pretty good here. And then the publisher goes and edits it. You're like, oh my God, we're not even
Not,
close. But I
wow.
love when people tear it apart.
That you
It's
do. It wasn't
yeah, it's
discouraging.
of course it is. You're
Oh.
like, I nailed this. This is great. And then somebody reads it and they're like, this isn't great for these reasons, or I think you should change it in some way that looks like that or looks like this. And when that happens, I find it at least for me, it pushes me out of my thought bubble. Like I didn't see it from that perspective. And now here's a new piece of information. The frustrating part is take this thing that you've read 100 times and you've edited it 120 times and now do it again. That's frustrating, but it's not like you're doing it for the same reasons with the same input every time. It's someone's
Yeah.
coming with a new perspective. Have you thought about it this way, or this part was compelling, and we have to find a way to. It's like a big puzzle piece, and again, that feeling when it snaps in, that's what I've always been kind of in love with. When like you have this problem and it's really hard and thorny, and you're working on it, like in a business context or a life context or whatever. I've always felt that I can feel the moment when it's starting to click.
Got it.
You don't know where it's going to go, but you feel it kind of coming together. And it needed to go through pushes and shoves and red markers until it really
The
started to click.
evolution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was
And it's
there
been
ever
so
any
cool to
part where you were like, no, I don't want to change, like double down, I'm not changing this particular scope or set? Was there ever a
definitely
part? Yeah.
tons. And the hard part there is, like I said, I'm not an author. So when somebody who's done 100 books looks at what you've done and says, nah, this is not how to do it, my gut
You're like,
reaction is,
oh, crushed.
well, it's like, oh, they're probably right. That's kind
Oh,
of how I feel, like they're probably right. But there does reach a point where you're like, we can only change so much before it loses what is like my vision for the
sure.
book.
Sure. And your
You know,
personality of it.
exactly. And at, it's hard to find that line because I'm deeply insecure as an author. Even saying that makes me feel weird. And so when you get somebody who is substantially more experienced than you and they have very valid reasoning, they're not wrong in any way, and they
Sure.
can point to
Sure.
like, here's 6 or 7 highly successful examples of not doing it the way you want to do it, to have the moment to step back and say, okay, this is how I want to do it. Even having heard what you're all mentioning is hard.
Hmm.
And, there were a small handful of those. A couple times I would push back and it's like, you know what, they're probably right. Like this is not the one to die on a hill about. And there were a small handful of times where it's like this voice or this way of talking, this way of describing it. I was maniacal about problem statements. I think the whole team probably thinks I'm nuts. Like I like the problem to be so crisp and clear. And that way, when the problem is crisp and clear to people, I can show you how to solve it really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it really, I have this process of just like, let me show you this problem you're having at work. You've thought about this problem, but I'm thinking about it. I'm going to show it to you in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And as soon as I do that, the solution becomes obvious. And oftentimes I find that books can try to solve too many problems all at once. And then when that happens, you can't make progress on any of them. And so each chapter in my book is a precise problem. And we went back and forth on like, are we clear on this problem? Is it precise? You have all this other great stuff. Why can't we just jam it in? I'm like, it's got to be. And so a lot of the push was there. And then also on the like, I wanted it to feel like you were sitting like we are now talking to me.
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah.
And
No,
that's been really
you
cool to
want that
learn.
to come across for sure.
Exactly.
No, that's great. I appreciate you nerding out with me because again, I enjoy it. But I'm sure everyone else is like, okay, enough. I want the story. So
If you ever
let's
want to
get
write a book,
in.
give me a shout.
Okay. So let's get into and we're sort of doing this backwards, but I really had to get those questions off. Let's go into the process then of how all of this came to be to begin with. Where did your messy journey start? What happened with coming to have this book?
Yeah, less enjoyable story. You asked about how I enjoyed the process. I would say that the process of like learning the lessons and getting to the book and what kind of the origin story, what precipitated it, is the worst experience of my entire life, is I think the easiest way to put it. The long and short is, you know, I think I still am, but like in a lot of ways, I was like the traditional type A, hard charging. I had like built multiple startups. I was very fortunate to be relatively early on at Airbnb. I was building an AI company, an AI startup from the ground up back before it was like the coolest thing that anybody had ever heard of. We were raising money, we were hiring people. It was like a big, stressful job. And I had my first kid, he was very young at the time. And I got a phone call one day. It was my sister. And she was calling me because my parents were away on vacation and she was in the emergency room of the hospital. She had gone in for a regular checkup. So it was like massively out of left field. She went to like a regular checkup, seeing her doctor. Doctor said, I need you to go and get some scans, and you need these scans like immediately. There's not like this can wait month or two or three. She calls me from the emergency room, Jason, I don't know exactly what's going on. To her credit, always trying to be strong, like it's all good.
Hmm.
you know, I'll figure it out. And luckily, my family kind of rallied around it. A young kid, my wife was just like, get out of here. Like, you got to go. And work was really
Hmm.
good about it. And I got to the hospital, and the scene was like, one of the worst things you want to see. Like, my sister was rightfully scared out of her mind. And she was getting all of the attention in the emergency room.
Hmm.
Every doctor, fastest scans. If she needed a thing, it was like, you need an MRI, like, boom, go get it. We're right back. You need a CAT scan, boom, go get it. We're right back. Like, that sounds great in theory
Sure.
because you're getting the highest, best care. But when you step back and think about it, it's like you're in a room of the most sick, most in danger folks, and you are getting prioritized above all of them.
Mm.
So it was clear that something was really wrong, and it turned out that she was diagnosed with like a very late stage, very, very aggressive cancer.
Mm.
And rough moment, obviously, and made harder. That was probably the worst moment of my life. And then the second worst moment of my life was having to call my parents who were away on vacation,
Oh.
middle of the night, and like, hey, guess what? Like, your daughter has cancer,
Mm.
and it's I don't have much more information for you, but it's not looking good, and you got to get home. And
Oh my
like, it
gosh.
was bad, and so coming out of the other end of that, she fought as hard as one could, and she passed away 9 months later.
Oh, I'm so
And,
sorry.
I was on a very steeply down trajectory. There was just a lot going on in my life. There were a lot of like life pressures, there were a lot of work pressures, and I was incapable of handling it in a way that I had never, to that point in my life, experienced it.
Mm.
And that turned into just like, I don't want to say desperation, but we're in that zone. Like, I have to figure out what I'm going to do differently in my life because I could feel where we were heading, and it wasn't. I'm sure I was not a joy to be around. I wasn't coping particularly well, and that kind of kicked off this like period of just extreme experimentation, I guess. I tried pretty much everything. You know, I I'm lucky in that I got time with my sister as she was sick and passing away, and we got to have kinds of conversations, and we were different in terms of the way we were living our lives, and I got to get her perspective. And then when she passed away, kind of held things together by the like skin of my teeth. And then it just was like, okay, something needs to change. And started going to therapy. I had a terrible preconceived notion of therapy that this is for people that, can't hold it together and they're not
Yeah.
strong enough. Was stupid way for me to have been thinking about it. Didn't serve me at all. And I don't recommend folks think in that particular way.
Sure, sure.
I started meditating. I was reading like 100 or more books a year, all on like health, wellness, well-being. And if I found a thing somewhere that said, if you do this, you will feel better or do better, I was like, great, I'm going to try that. And I kept a tracker. I was probably doing 2 or 3 different experiments like every week to see, does this make me
Mm,
feel better or worse? How's it going? And over time, things started to get better and better and better. And ultimately, it turned into the lessons in the book. So
yeah, yeah. Talk a little bit. You had mentioned getting to spend that time with your sister, and you sort of both of you coming, maybe having different perspectives of life and things like that. First, was she older or younger?
older.
So was her perspective vastly different than had what you had been doing?
Yeah, for sure. My sister was like incredibly kind, and I'm not saying I'm not kind, but for
Mm,
her, there was like no, she'd be like rushing to a meeting and she'd see somebody and she would just stop and
mm,
be like, meh, this thing doesn't matter. I don't
yeah,
need to be there at exactly that moment. I'm gonna like do this, and she was, for me, always, I could never describe it this way then. I've had a lot of time to, reflect on it. She was deeply in the moment in a way I couldn't appreciate. And she
mm,
probably couldn't appreciate the way I was not.
sure.
And for both of us, family was always a hugely important factor. But what I learned is that I was over invested in the future and radically under invested in the moment because I
Mm,
didn't know what to do with that. I always said family is the most important thing for me.
sure, sure.
And what I meant by that is I am busting my ass now so that it creates some future state in which we're all going to be forever and ever happy, amen, right? Like,
Right, right.
and it was always for my family. It was always in my head that I don't care about this stuff for ego. I don't need to be flashy. It's to create
Sure.
something in the future. And what I realized, both by like reflecting on my sister's life and the experience of her not making it past 40, I realized that that doesn't work when you're not investing in the moment like at all. Because number one, you may never get there. I had a very, very visceral experience with the reality that you might never reach that moment. And on top of that, if you don't enjoy yourself along the way, if you're not showing up as the person that you want to be from here to there, even if you get there, you've kind of lost the opportunity to experience life in the way that you want to experience it from here to there. And so it was a wake up call is the best way that I can describe it, of just I took some of my attention and instead said, like, does it have to be true that I have to be passionate about, in quotations, like overachieving or accomplishing a lot of things and doing that at the expense of experience that I'm getting right now? Can I enjoy it and also be highly motivated by accomplishing goals and various forms of achievement and what have you? And that has really, really shifted my perspective. And for a lot of times, I dealt with I dealt with a lot of guilt because I can say to you now, and it doesn't bother me as it used to. I am the, I feel as if I'm the happiest and most well-adjusted now than I've ever been in my life.
Wow.
And it drove a ton of guilt for me because how could I be doing better now than when my sister was alive? It
Sure.
feels like a horrible thing as a human to say. And what I learned through kind of looking back, the process of writing the book is highly inspired by her. It's dedicated to her. The preface is all about her. Like, what I learned through that process is I'm doing a massive disservice by not talking about it, by not embracing it. If I could bring her back at the expense of everything I feel I've gained between now and then, in a heartbeat, I would do it.
Of course.
I can't. And
Right.
therefore, I think I'm doing a huge disservice by minimizing that, not embracing it. It's a hard thing to get. For me, it was a hard thing to come to grips with, but it is the honest truth of the situation. And, for that reason, I think I'm I'm living the best version that I can
Yeah.
and the best kind of version of what I think she would have wanted by being able to say this thing is terrible and there's a small silver lining in it as well, which again makes me feel like I'll be terribly judged by people to say a statement like that out loud, but it is the honest truth that it is
Yeah.
full of terrible stuff and has led to some incredible positivity too.
Yeah. I hate that you think people would judge you. I would hope that would not be true. And I hope for the opposite. And in fact, it sounds like so much that you're honoring her in this way and that you were able to garner something. She taught you a lesson. Maybe even at the moment you weren't ready to receive that lesson, but it sunk into you somewhere. The seed was planted, and going through what you had to go through. Oftentimes we talk about the messy and reaching the bottom, and how we find our strength through the mess. And it sounds like she was that for you in both ways, right? In a positive way, but then you also had to go through the grief and the terrible things of this guilt that you were feeling. And so I think that actually to me is very inspiring, and again honoring her in that way, and to be able to say it the way that you are saying it, and be very open and raw with, this is what it is. Like, I just think that's very powerful, very impactful. Would So let's see what I'm really trying to get here. The book, when you sat down to start doing it, and you say that she was in the reason for the book and inspiring and everything, was it also sort of cathartic as you went through writing about her to sort of come to terms with these feelings?
Unintentionally. It was the preface is my experience of her experience, right? It's a bit of a backstory behind the book. And my like motivation for the book is that people who read it can get even the smallest fraction of the gains that I have gotten without the grief. I would never wish that on anybody. And I think that was the kind of what I realized was the motivation of it. And in the act of writing it down, the preface of my book, I told you the phone call to my parents was the hardest phone call I ever had to make. The
Mhm.
preface to the book is the hardest thing I've ever written. It like I wrote it, I cried, I sent it to people, I cried.
Yeah, yeah,
People read it and they call me and they tell me what they think, and I cry about it. And it's just like, and that's where the book's a bit different. Is it is an in quotations business book, and they don't start like this. And
sure,
people
sure.
were like, "Are you sure you want to start with like this kind of a heavy thing? Are people gonna?" And I was like, "This is the way the book is. This is why
Yeah,
it's here. This is what needs to be in there." And yeah, in some ways, getting it out was helpful for sure. And then I think being able to talk to people about the book and the experience a little bit more has helped. And
hmm,
having a book out forces you to talk about why
sure,
you have the book out.
sure.
So yeah, I think the
Yeah.
process of writing it down has been great, and I think it was, yeah, overall it helped for sure.
So without giving a ton away, can you build me the bridge between the how what you learned with her relates to business?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, I was doing all of this kind of life experimentation, life hacks, they would, I guess, conventionally be called. And what I found is I was doing all this stuff, cold plunges and hanging from my arms for 3 minutes every day and hanging for upside down for a couple minutes. Like
Wow.
if someone somewhere was like, hey, this will make you feel good, I was like, let's see what
Let's
happens,
try it.
right?
Yeah.
And what I noticed is many of them failed for me. They didn't work for me. And there were always some that kind of stuck around and made me feel better. And it was great. And then I plateaued. And I was like, that's weird. Like it was going really well and I'm feeling pretty well, but it feels like there's more to do here. And that's when, in retrospect, I don't know why it took me so long to clue this, but like the light bulb went off. Like I am completely avoiding where I spend the
Hmm.
greatest majority of my waking hours, Monday to Friday, is like at work. And what I learned is a lot of the preconceived notions I had about the way I was living my life, when I wrote the assumptions down and like tested them for myself, I realized, these assumptions are wrong. And then I applied the same mentality to work, right? I was like, what's the right way to work? I'm going to work more days for more hours. I'm going to more days for fewer hours, less days for more hours. I'm going to work like evenings, weekends. I'm going to wake up and work in the middle of the night. Like I think it was Da Vinci used to do. Like polyphasic sleeping, whatever you want to call it. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to try all these things. What if I set more goals, no goals, only goals? Like, how's that going to change stuff? And as I experimented with these things at work, the same thing happened, but I never plateaued. To this day, I haven't plateaued. So I tried like every productivity hack I could find, anything that said this will help you perform better, enjoy your job more, whatever. And what I learned is that this core assumption that you have to endure work versus enjoying it was just
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally incorrect. And I actually learned that by focusing on enjoying work more, I started to perform better. And when I perform better, I was enjoying it more. And so I enjoy it more, I perform better, I perform better, I enjoy it more. It's this like amazing flywheel. And the better
Mm-hmm.
things are going at work, the better I'm feeling in my life overall. I feel like I'm crushing it at my job, right? I go home, I'm hanging out with the family, and I'm like, I'm firing on all cylinders with them. And then I'm feeding off that energy, which is going back into my work. And then I have this amazing macro
It's
flywheel.
almost like an infinity loop. It,
That's
it
right.
feeds the one, feeds the other.
That's right.
So, I mean, in a nutshell, then, is it like perspective of the mind? Is it just showing up to work and saying, I'm going to enjoy this? Or are there actual tangible hacks where somebody can put to practice of while they're sitting at work, hating their boss, hating their job, whatever it is,
Mhm.
they can do? Is it like mental exercises? Is it physical exercise? What are they doing?
And this is where the book came in, is it's old me would have heard me talk about these things and said, okay, dude, like, why don't you go grow a beard and sit in a cave and just like kumbaya all day long, right? Like, I couldn't have understood it. And what I realized is I was working with a lot of folks who were similar to me. And until you see the impact of it, trying to describe the way to get the impact and what it can feel like is, for me, I couldn't find a way to do it. And the bridge between the two for me was tactical. Can I show, as I mentioned to you earlier, can I take one of these lessons I learned and find a very precise problem statement that most of us are dealing with? And if I can get this precise problem statement, can I give people a very precise tactic that's simple enough that you can try it and you will see in like a very small amount of time, does this help, yes or no? And what I learned and what I hope my book shows is in a lot of cases, the expectation is you have to go and become some supersized, superhuman version of yourself in order to make an improvement. You have to do a big amount of professional development. You have to completely change your mindset. You have to build these skills, get this promotion, get into that position with this pay, and blah, 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 blah. And what I learned is actually that's not the case.
Mm.
For most folks, what I'm trying to get accomplished with the book is like, if you can talk or you can type, you can try every single tactic in my book. And if you try these tactics, one of them alone, I think will have a relatively big impact. All 9 of them together. And the idea of the book, it's 9 of the most common challenges we all face at work: miscommunications, slow decision making, self-doubt, how to see opportunities other people are missing, things like that, that feel nebulous and highfalutin and what do I do with them? But they're boiled down into, here is why that's happening. Here's a thing you can do about it. You can literally put the chapter down, go give it a try, and then you tell me, does it work or not work?
Wow.
And in that way, once I got to that stage of these are the most common ones I'm seeing, I'm helping so many people with these things. It got to the point of, okay, I think there's a thing here that like I can communicate these tactics. I don't have to talk about how, you know, the mentality shift will come
Mm-hmm.
by doing the tactic, because you will see the impact and it will change the way you think about something. And in that way, it's less of a top down and it's much more of a bottom up. Like, just stop miscommunicating at work. You'll be far less frustrated. You'll have way more time to get stuff done. And
Yeah.
by the way, you don't have to read 52 books on communication. The 80/20 rule is like, I'll give you one tactic that's going to solve 80% of your problems. And if you want to go and become an expert, in the book, I recommend, like every single chapter, I recommend multiple other books that if you want to go deeper, you should go and read them. But like, what's the 80%? Because we're all busy,
Sure,
really,
sure.
really tried to focus on that.
I love the actionable things that people can apply. I love that. So when does the book come out?
September 2nd, which would have been my sister's birthday.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I love
So
that. I
it's
love
very,
that.
very
So
soon. Yeah.
September 2nd. And the name of the book was
Your grass is greener.
Your Grass is Greener. Okay. I knew it was green something, but okay. Your Grass is Greener comes out September 2nd on Amazon everywhere. Where can they find
Yeah,
it?
yeah, it's on Amazon, and I'm lucky to have a great publisher and all the other places that you would go to find a book. You'll find it relatively easily on Amazon. You can also go to yourgrassisgreener.com, and that's my website for the book. You'll find it there. There's links to go to Amazon if you want to get to it that way.
That's awesome. And then on social media, if they want to find you?
Yeah, so fun fact, I'm not like massive into social media. It's just like personal choice. So LinkedIn is my kind of platform of preference. I think if you search my name, Jason Silver, on LinkedIn, you'll find two that aren't me. One is a Christian rock singer. He's great. Check out his albums if you like Christian rock.
I love that.
And the other is a dating coach for women. And don't know him. Sure, he's great. I'm not those two Jason Silvers.
Okay.
You'll recognize me by like
Yeah.
the book will be mentioned. Some of the experience I've been up to, we mentioned in there too. But would love folks to connect with me there as well.
Yeah, I love it. I wish you the best success. And then last question, do you foresee yourself doing another one?
It's so funny, like it's such a funny question. I remember when it's like you get engaged and someone's like, for me, it was like, oh, we got engaged. Like, well, when are you going to get married? And then you get married, like,
Mhm.
when are the
When do you
kids
have kids?
coming?
Yeah.
Right. It's so funny being this close to the book being done because this is like hey, the book's coming out. Are you going to write another one?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think,
You're like, no, I just want to sit and revel in everything that
yeah,
I've accomplished. Yeah.
I think, non-committal, like I enjoyed the process of doing it. I have multiple ideas for other books that potentially could come out of it. And I don't want to make that decision right now. Like I want to enjoy, like you
Yeah, and you
said, like
should. You
I'd like
should.
the book to come out. I'd like to see how it's received. I'd love to hear feedback from people. If there is a way in my life to work in one of the things I do regularly is writing another book, that would be great because the
Sure.
experience was super interesting and helpful. But I think for now, let's get it out in the world, and once it's out there, we'll see.
Yeah.
And I think,
Revel in it. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure. No, I
we'll
love
see.
that.
We
I
will
so
see.
appreciate you coming on the podcast. I know the messy story was a difficult one. I appreciate you being raw and open to sharing it. I think this is such a great way to honor her. And what was your sister's name?
Rachel,
Rachel. Such a great way to honor Rachel. And I just I wish you lots of luck and success with the book. I really do.
thank you, sir. I'm super grateful everybody who made it through the entire podcast. Hopefully you learned some stuff about writing a book, and if it was interesting, like would love folks to check out the book and would love to hear what you think. And for me, the highest motivation is just if I can impact people's lives, it can even have a small shift in your life, and I genuinely do believe it will. For me, that is, you're doing me a huge favor and you're helping me carry forward everything I learned from my sister. So I'd love
Love
folks
it.
to check it out, and thank you for having me. I'm very, very grateful for the time.
Thank you, Jason.